afternoon. I'm Mo Wright, Chair of the CMC Board of Trustees, President at Raymond Consulting. Thank you all for being here today for another fabulous forum here at the Columbus Metropolitan Club. Today's forum, Rerouting Transit, Modes That Move Us, is supported by my own company, Raymond Consulting, along with the Robert Weiler Company and MS Consultants. And a special thanks to our partners today, the Society of Marketing Professional Services. Give us all a round of applause for their support of today's forum. We know that Columbus will grow, continue to grow over the next few years and will grow exponentially over the next several decades. We know that transportation, the ability to move in and around the community is critical, both for the people who live here and for the businesses that are located here. While Columbus is doing just fine as an automobile-centric city, I saw gasoline today for about $1.89, so we're doing okay as an automobile-centric city. But is that sustainable long term? Not everyone can afford a car, and not everyone even desires to own a car. Roads and bridges are extremely expensive to build and to maintain, and additional automotive-related costs like land use and parking and safety and insurance continue to plague our community as options and force us to look for alternatives. Walking paths, bikes, buses, trains, even self-driving Google cars are questions that we know that our dynamic panel today will help us to think about and to answer our questions. I want you to welcome this dynamic panel today. First, the Executive Director of the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, Mr. William Murdock. He's followed by the President and CEO of the Central Ohio Transit Authority, Mr. Curtis Stitt. And then here in the middle, we have the Assistant Vice President for Mobility Research of the Ohio State University, Carla Bailo, and our host for today, Elissa Schneider, a Chair of the Transit Columbus. Elissa, the podium is yours.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Mo. This is going to be fun. Inside 2050, C-Bus, Uber, KOGO, Car2Go, Connect Columbus, TSR, Jet Task Force, and COTA Next Gen. All new projects, and in some cases, new words that didn't exist a couple of years ago. This, combined with strong neighborhoods, record development, and new city leadership, is creating new vision. Much of the vision we can already see, right? Retail downstairs, residents upstairs, shade trees, sidewalk cafes. This is, smartly, a city self-consciously reinventing itself for the 21st century. And we're well on the way to this vision. It's already happening. If you click onto Columbus Underground and go to their development page, you'll see countless examples of this kind of development. We're no longer a little big town. We're grown up. The Columbus landscape is changing. Its people are changing, its generations are changing, its neighborhoods are coming alive. We're at a tipping point. Who we were and who we will be. And so it's decision time. I think that's what makes everyone a little nervous. And that's because these are scary, expensive, difficult decisions. And they can also be exciting, groundbreaking, and transformational. I think the M&M activity today showed that if we're going to invest in new modes of transportation, we're going to have to think creatively and differently about funding streams. But none of my questions today deal with funding, although there are plenty of good questions there. I think that could be a forum in the future. But the truth is, we'll figure out the money. Money follows a city's priorities and vision. I'll say it again. Money follows a city's priorities and vision. So let's talk about priorities and vision. You ready? So I have an easy opening question for each of you, and then we'll kind of dive in a little bit further from there. Curtis, for the first time in 40 years, COTA recently went through a massive system redesign process that will take effect in 2017. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. First of all, I'm happy to be here. The premise that we're operating from at COTA is that we have to do everything we can to try to achieve the goals of this community. How are we effectively using the public transportation resources that are entrusted to us to make sure that we're moving the needle in the right direction for this community achieving its goals? Then we have to make sure that our current system is as sound and as strong as it can be today. Then we simultaneously have to plan for the future. That middle step there is what you just mentioned, our process we call the TSR, Transit System Redesign, We took a look at our system map a few years ago, about 3 years ago, and it looked exactly the same as our system map 40 years ago looked. And the question was, is this paradigm for providing public transit effective today? It may have been effective 40 years ago. Is it effective today? So we took some time to do a comprehensive analysis of our entire system. We took a look at how we can improve our system. So using the resources that are available to us today, the half-cent sales tax, even though we're not talking about funding here, we're talking about making sure we're good stewards of the public funds that we have today. How can we make improvements to our system using our current resources? And that's what the transit system redesign is all about. How can we more effectively move people from place to place throughout our community without spending any more money, and making sure that we have a sound foundational system upon which we can build as we grow as a community for the next 35 years.
Thanks, Curtis. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and hear from Carla. Carla, my question for you is, what technologies does Columbus need now to improve how people will navigate the city in the future?
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Great question. You're asking an engineer about technology, so this could be a long answer, but I'll try to keep it short.
I will cut you off.
I know you will. And I hope you all put all your M&Ms on the ITS system development square. I did, and it looks a little lopsided. The good news is most of the technology already exists, and within Columbus, you have the excellent ORNet system that when we think about the future of transportation, it's all about your cell phone on wheels, so to speak, or your mobility device being connected to every aspect of your life. And that means communication. And already with ORNet, it exists here. What we're going to have to do to become more efficient and effective and not have to improve and increase the size of our roadways or build new roadways is use that space more efficiently, which means we need to have the infrastructure along the roadways and within the city that allows us to see what the throughput is, to allow for smart traffic signals. Also, to improve our safety, we're going to have to understand where our pedestrian crossings are, where our construction areas are happening, and all of this is going to come from communication that already exists within the 4G networks, the LTE networks, and soon to be 5G networks, and also with the fiber, the optic fiber that we have throughout the state connecting everything. This, along with what's called DSRC, and it's a frequency range that has been specified for vehicles to communicate to each other and to communicate with the infrastructure and to communicate perhaps with pedestrians or wheelchair-bound people or whatever mobility devices on the roadway. This kind of communication is critical to allow that kind of efficiency and to allow the safety that can correspond, with this kind of technology. And it exists. We need to perfect it. We need to make it better. The engineers can do that, and we'll just take it one step at a time.
Thanks, Carla. William, we know if we build for cars, we get more cars. We know if we build for people, we get more people. What kind of community do you think we want to build? And how do we build it from a transportation perspective?
Well, great question. And I, too, am really excited to be here. To answer that question requires all of you in this room and the panelists that we have here. And it's one that I think that you kind of laid out initially is following the community's vision will make things happen. And so when we look at transportation at MORPC right now, we know that there is significant change on the landscape. We've done a study with our partners at 2020 ULI about how Columbus and Central Ohio is growing and changing. And we know that demographics and growth are changing dramatically. We're expecting a 500,000 people in the region. We're expecting a doubling of seniors, a burgeoning young population. We've got major challenges ahead of us in infrastructure and housing and all of these things, all at the same time people are changing their preferences. They're demanding walkability, they're demanding new recreation and health and quality of life amenities, they're looking for connectivity, they're also experiencing what Carla's been working on and changing transportation and technology and available types of modes and that. And so when we get down to what kind of community do we want, we know that to plan effectively for it, we have to answer two questions, and that's people want choices. This is an all of the above strategy that we're hearing from people. They want every mode, they want every connectivity, they want it to be easy, but there are also needs that we have to meet with our community. And I think when we look at transportation and how to make a community that has a high quality of life that's really accessible, this is our challenge, and what's really exciting is our community wants more options, and like you said, that vision, if it's there, we can deliver more options regardless of how many M&Ms people had on their plates and how many they ate. So.
And just maybe a little bit of perspective on Insight 2050, which was what William was talking about. I talk sometimes when I give speeches about the changes that are coming, that in 2050, I will be 70. So when we're thinking, I know it's terrifying, but when we're thinking about the future and think about somebody, like me who's, just barely a millennial, and thinking about 2050, we're not really planning for me, but we're planning for me, but I'll be probably with another hip by 2050. And so, but those are some real realities to just sort of consider as we move through this. So, next question. Robert Morgan, President and CEO of the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce, one of our identified peer cities, said at the COTA annual luncheon that the leadership of Charlotte firmly believed that a comprehensive mass transit system was critical to the region's success and competitiveness in the 21st century. Do you think our city feels the same way?
I think our city feels the same way. You mentioned that we have a change in the administration at Columbus. This new change is a great time to begin to build new champions for a comprehensive, integrated transportation system for Columbus and Central Ohio. The desire to have a strong public transit system is just the first step. It's the will to pursue it and stand up in the face of the challenges and the pushback we get when we talk about the thing you don't want to talk about today, and that's the funding. We've got to be willing to be creative and identify ways that we can fund our systems differently. We've got to be strong and forceful as we pursue the current funding streams. And as we develop champions in this community, I think we position ourselves better to achieve this transportation system that will be able to catch up and keep pace with the growth of our community.
Thanks.
If I can
jump in.
add to that.
Absolutely.
The thing that really impressed me when Charlotte came to talk to us, and we see this in other communities, is that communities who realize that transportation isn't just about transportation. It's not about point A to B anymore. Transportation in the system it's an economic development tool, it's a workforce tool, it's an equity tool, it's an environmental tool. And having sensitivity and nuance about the different types of modes and the effects they have on our ability to compete as a region and as individuals' ability to succeed and get around, that's really where we see leading regions going. And we think Columbus and Central Ohio are headed that way, but being very mindful that this isn't just about A to B anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you really need to think about how you can change your mindset. So when we think about mass transit, we think automatically light rail, buses, major investments. But why couldn't it be a motorized walkway to get you through the city? Why couldn't it be several small Google cars in a row moving in a nice train rather than a train? Because we've already got the roads. So I think we need to think about, really how to shift the box from normal mass transit to a new way of mass transit that we can do economically and gives people the choices that they're talking about.
Thanks, Carla. So speaking of peer cities, Columbus is the largest city in the United States without passenger rail. I think you all knew I was going to say that at some point, right? Our peers in Phoenix, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Indy, Houston, Kansas City, Minneapolis, Detroit, and Salt Lake City have all invested in rail or streetcars in the past decades. I didn't even mess with the coasts. How do you think Columbus compares to our peer cities in terms of transit, and what do we need to do to become more competitive?
I think Columbus compares with our peer cities as a city very well.
I would agree.
I think as we look at the transportation infrastructure that is available in Columbus, let me just back up for a minute, because we always start the conversation with Columbus is the 15th largest city. It's the only one that size that doesn't have a light rail system. If you look at a lot of cities that have light rail systems, they are a lot smaller than Columbus. You know, I took a look at the numbers when I was out in Seattle. Seattle is much smaller as a city than Columbus. The region is much bigger in terms of population. And it's not just the city size that we should be looking at. It is what's the population in the region, what's the density in that region that drives our ability to sustain any level of transportation. So I would ask us to start looking at our region as a whole and not just focus on the numbers within the city limits, because if we do that, we're missing opportunities to serve our entire community. So that being said, I think we compare very well. I think our community is on the cusp of doing the things that we need to do to move from an all-bus system to a more robust public transportation system. And the key is understanding what this community will need as it grows and to develop a system that meets those needs. Our next generation planning process that we're engaged in right now at COTA is focused on one thing. It's not focused on a mode. It's not saying that we must have rail. It's not focused on a dollar amount, saying that we think we can get the community to pass another 0.5% levy, so we should plan a system to that dollar amount. We're focused on what the need of this community will be as we grow, and we're planning a system that will meet those needs. So we're not constrained by dollars. We're not constrained by a single mode. We are trying to look at all of the goals and aspirations of this community and develop a plan that matches the direction that our community is moving in.
Great. William?
If I can add on to that,
Yeah.
I know that what Curtis said about not focusing on the mode, I know that's hard to do sometimes when you go to other communities and you see successful modes, but really looking what our community needs and the mix of options that we need is important. And it's not just passenger rail or light rail or streetcars. We also have issues around workforce transportation, rural transportation. We've got a lot of mobility issues with people as they're aging, people who need to get to work. So we have to look at that whole option. But I know, Elissa, that you asked about passenger rail, and you know that my organization is working on passenger rail.
I didn't ask about passenger rail specifically. I just said that it's happening in a lot of different places.
So here, doggone it, you roped me in. All right.
Yeah.
So MORPC is working with its communities and communities from here to Chicago to examine a proposal on a passenger rail from Columbus to Chicago. And the great thing is communities, rural and urban, Columbus, Marysville, and on off to Chicago, are all collaborating and talking about this system. This would be a long-term investment. So this is not something that will happen in 6 months. If it happens, it will take years of preparation and planning, focusing on the corridor. Maybe the trains will be autonomous or something like that, but we have to be planning for it. And the way that we're looking at it is, does it save time? Is it a good investment? Is there a return on the investment? We think initial studies show that it is, but also the way we're looking at the all of the above strategy is, if we imagined our region wasn't on the interstate system, or if we weren't on the freight rail system, and we were one of the few that weren't on there, we'd be clamoring and working really hard to connect into a national system. And so when we look at passenger rail, if there's a national system, we want to make sure we're evaluating and seeing should Columbus be on that national system. And I think the initial answer we have is yes, but there's a lot of work to get to that point.
And so maybe a follow-up to that, a question. If the city had been successful getting, and I'll give you two options here, the 2007 streetcar proposal or the 3C Cleveland to Columbus to Cincinnati passenger rail, the 3C project. If we were successful getting those two programs built, what do you think the reaction and impact would be here in Columbus today?
Okay, so let's start with the 3C passenger rail. So that system, should that have happened, we think would have been transformative, and it could have been an economic driver. The times weren't as fast as people were hoping for in terms of high speed, but
Sure.
If you talk to anybody who works with companies or works in and out of Cleveland or Cincinnati or Dayton,
Or is a Browns fan?
or a Browns fan or a Bengals fan,
Oh, sure.
we're all Buckeyes fans,
Yeah, yeah.
so the trains were becoming here.
Go Bucks.
That's right. But had we had that, it would have been used, and we see examples around the country where similar types of systems between similar metro areas could have been really successful. So that is a loss for the region. I think it's fair to say that. On the types of modes that we'd have downtown, again, we know that if they're put in the right places, these types of modes, be it light rail or streetcar, whatever it is, generate economic development. They encourage redevelopment, and any type of investment like that, we would have expected there would have been more redevelopments, more activity in our community. So I think that's fair to say.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Curtis?
If we were able to build the light rail system that we were planning during the first 5 years of the 2000s, we'd probably now be building the second or third line. And that's just looking at other communities that have invested in light rail in their communities. Even the areas that did not want light rail in other cities and regions, the particular neighborhoods and areas that were opposed to it are now clamoring to get it. One of the things we have to, maybe I'm going a little bit off question here, but one of the things that we have to look at as we develop these systems, though, it really connects to something that William talked about, and that is, connectivity. We're talking a lot about the future and where this community is going, what transportation should be doing, economic development. But we've got to remember there are neighborhoods and parts of our community that are not connected. Mm-hmm. And at COTA, we have a responsibility to plan for the future, but in that planning, we can't leave behind these neighborhoods that today are not being served as well as we could serve them. That's why I say we have to catch up and then keep up. And in the future, we want to make sure that all segments of our community are well served by our transportation system, so that everybody is connected to the jobs. Everybody benefits from all the economic development that's going on because they are connected throughout our entire region. So whatever the mode is, we've got to make sure that it's, again, not just single mode, but a comprehensive system that connects all segments of our community to all of the great things that are going on here in Columbus and Central Ohio.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think whatever happens next really should be about everyone, and really thinking about, the big picture, too, of how people are getting and navigating the whole city. So let's sort of move a little bit more into some technology questions. And there's been several for-profit entities that have entered the market in Columbus, providing different modes of transit. What can be learned from their operations and technologies in terms of creating better public transit for Columbus?
Great question. And how many people use Uber? Yeah, it's great, isn't it? I love it. I don't rent cars anymore. And I apologize to anybody in the taxi business. But, what I think these up-and-coming companies are doing and will continue to do is disrupt and rewrite the way we move goods and people. And I think there's a lot to be learned about that in terms of the business models, in terms of the products that are coming on the roads. A few people were just in Europe where they had what they call mobile city buses that basically took people from their hotel to the convention center, fully autonomous. The people just could get in and ride to where they needed to go. It's a new company. The existing companies are going to have to move and shift in the way they think. And the emerging technologies and the emerging companies are going to cause them to do that and really start thinking out of the box and bringing some of the best new ideas on the market, because there is not going to be a one-size-fits-all. It's just not going to happen, and we just have to provide the means to get from A to B for people to work, for people to live, for people to balance their lives. And they want to be able to do that seamlessly. It's going to require a lot of new technologies, a lot of new different companies coming into the market. There's one company that I have coming to campus in a couple of weeks. It's called Innova, and it's a small product that comes out of Italy. It's a car, we call it a quadricycle, which means it's not really legal to drive on the streets here. We don't have a way to certify the product, but it's certifiable in Europe and in many other parts of the world. This car does not go over 35 miles an hour. And it's fully EV, and they want us to help them make it into an autonomous product. But just think how great it's a small car. It's like about the size of a golf cart. But they've got this great innovative product. It's coming. It's already on campuses in other states throughout the U.S. Campus is a great place to really test and demonstrate the ability of these products. But it's something new and totally revolutionary that I can guarantee you any of the big 6 automakers wouldn't be putting on the road today. They can't afford to, and they're not that quick and nimble. But they're going to have to. And it's these competing technologies that always brings out the best in what's needed and what we need to deliver to the public. And all those dollars that people are spending today buying cars and paying for insurance and paying for accidents and paying for repairs, we can use a lot of those dollars, once we have cars that are no longer crashing into each other and, fully safe, no rehab. There's going to be a lot of dollars that we can then use to make sure that everybody has access and a way to be mobile and be sociable.
So, Carla, speaking of crashes or not, how do you envision driverless cars sharing the streets with people and bicyclists?
Yeah, that's a good question. Not only with people and bicyclists, because they can detect people and bicycles. We have the technology today. It's on the cars. The sensors are there.
And COTA buses.
They know. And buses, too. Everything, it can be sensed. The sharing, though, and the process is going to be really interesting, because at first you're going to have cars that are already out on the road today that basically, my current car can drive itself fundamentally. If I'm on a straight highway, it has the lane departure and it steers back towards the center. It has automatic cruise control. It has lane departure warning. It has everything. But I don't really feel comfortable with it like that. Not because my car doesn't know what it's doing, but I'm surrounded by dumb cars.
That's what everyone in Central Ohio thinks.
Fundamentally. But I mean, we're going to have this dichotomy for several years where the cars are going to have to understand and be able to see and sense and learn what the other cars are doing. So it's going to be a real learning process. So at first we'll have clear algorithms put in the cars. In this circumstance, you do this. But circumstances will continue to arise, and that's where artificial intelligence and continued learning of the machine will take place. And we've even talked about what are we going to do for motorcycles and things like that. I was talking with Harley Davidson, and they're really looking at making their motorcycles start to broadcast at least where they are, so that they don't. One of their main concerns now is they get hit often while turning. So if they're broadcasting where they are, even if the driver can't see them, the car knows and the car will stop. So how shall we put in those communication devices and make sure that everybody knows where everybody is and what that object is? Is it important to avoid it or not? You know, just like you avoid a dog or not. You know, it really depends on your own learnings. But we need to experiment. We need to hold, you know, test beds and do a lot of work as a community to be able to enable these interactions. It's going to be several years of smart and dumb.
Thanks. So maybe one last follow-up on driverless cars. How can driverless cars benefit people and public transit?
Oh, wow. That is the most important question, because we hear about driverless cars and everyone talks about the technology and how cool it is. But the number one reason for driverless cars is safety. You know, it really is clear this year the number of deaths has increased on our freeways for the first time in about 10 years. They've been flat for 10 years. And as of a month ago, we were 8,000 more fatalities this year than we were in the last 10 years, year over year. And that's a serious issue. So, you know, I'm going to brag for a minute. I had my first granddaughter last Wednesday, and I'm hoping that she will never need a driver's license and I never have to worry about her being in an auto accident. And really, that's number one. Number two, when we think about the aging of our society and people losing their ability to be mobile, talk about 2050, I'll be 90 by then, hopefully still around, but who knows. But I probably won't be driving, but hopefully I'll still want to be social, I'll still want to manage my own life. And having a product or a device that allows me to get from A to B, to manage my life, have that independence, and be able to socially interact with others, because that's vital to your self-health and awareness. I think those are two of the most critical reasons that I think driverless cars are so important. Safety, elderly and disabled ability to be independent and live a good life. And those are the main reasons. After that, it becomes convenience. You know, it really becomes convenience so that you can do other things and get where you need to be. You don't have to be bothered with traffic jams, et cetera. It's convenience. But really, let's think about those two drivers, and then those two drivers will then put the prioritization properly.
Thank you. So in a few minutes, we move to audience questions. But first, let me ask this final thought. And I want everyone to answer it. If success was guaranteed, what bold step would you take next to improve the public transit system in Columbus?
I'll let everybody else answer.
Not all at once.
What bold step would we take?
What bold step? Guaranteed success.
Okay.
One bold step.
One bold step. But the disclaimer while I'm thinking of my answer is that we do have really amazing transit system here in Franklin County with COTA for the resources they have, for the job they have to do. I know that they're planning to be better, but we should all be proud of what we have here. So as a bold step, I'm torn between looking at corridors that are higher capacity corridors, so things like rail, to really help adjust congestion issues and provide those additional options. I'm torn between that and making sure that we do everything we can to integrate these technologies ahead of time. When we think of the technology and safety, we also have to think equity, because some of these improvements come out for people who can afford expensive cars. And so making sure that we're driving that technology down to all users quickly is really important. So for me, it's between a nice corridor and lots of technology.
You're a peacemaker.
Yeah. It's I work at MORPC.
Yeah.
So.
We do appreciate that as a community.
Yeah.
So I know you want to go last. You know, the bold step that I would like to see happen, coming from industry and now being in academia, is really a lot better cooperation between government, industry, and academia, because there are so many studies that need to happen to make 2050 the reality that we want it to happen, that we have to start working together and working more collaboratively amongst the states, the feds, the universities. I need to do more work with other universities that have core competencies that Ohio State does not have. We need to band together and work together and change the normal way that we do research and development to make these things happen quickly, efficiently, and at the best cost that we can manage.
Thank you.
Driverless flying vehicles. You said
COTA hovergraphs.
If it's a guaranteed success,
Yeah.
you don't have to build any more roads to accommodate it.
We can do it.
But you know, that's a tough and interesting question, because there isn't any one solution. You know, I think generally is, you know, keeping up with the technology as it develops and making sure that the system that we put on the street keeps pace with that system or with that technology. Folks ask me all the time, you know, what do I think about the competition? I say, what competition? Uber, Car2Go, even Kogo. Driverless vehicles, platooning vehicles where you've got 18. I saw a presentation where there were 18 18-wheelers in a row driving what they call platooning. The only two of those vehicles that had drivers was the one in the front and the one in the back. That's how technology is going to advance in the future. So I guess I would just say generally, being able to keep up with technology and being able to afford to implement the best technology that we can in the transit system where the funding is always so tough to get so that we can keep pace. I would say driverless buses, but the vice president of our union is sitting right there.
Yeah. Wonder what the insurance would be. It's a whole nother question. It's CMC's tradition to take audience questions. So please come up to the mic, state your name, ask your question. And Jane, we ask in advance that you not make long editorial comments.
Thank you very
Let's proceed.
Thank you very much. I'm Jane Scott. I've heard a couple of times, and I just want your reaction to this, that we're our own worst enemy because our highways, our freeways in Columbus are so good, and you can get anywhere in this city from side to side in a few minutes. A friend of mine from Chicago looked at me one time and said, "Why do you have a traffic helicopter? You know, there are no traffic jams. The ones that are, they come on and they say, oh, it's going to take 8 minutes from Grove City instead of 4. Are we our own worst enemy?"
You know, if I can jump in there.
Sure.
I think that when we look at how we planned in Columbus, low congestion is a great thing to have, and it makes it very easy and very accessible for us to get along. What we're thinking about going forward, though, is if we add 500,000 people or more to the region, what does that look like? And when we look at the ability to expand the existing highway network, we're reaching limits, so we need to start looking at what other options there are so that maybe we can keep low congestion, maybe we can add these other options, but we can also look at some other higher capacity corridors to help solve that problem too. So
I would also say it doesn't really matter if that's not the way people want to move anyway in the future.
You know, they call Columbus a 20-minute town. Whether that's literal or figurative doesn't really matter. You know, folks at COTA seem to get employees, sometimes myself, get excited and upset when we read the articles about how easy it is to get around in Columbus. And we think, gosh, all the plans that we're trying to make for a better transportation system, we don't really need it because we're so low on the list of congested cities. Well, my thought is, gosh, that's a list we don't want to be at the top of. Right. So what are we doing today to make sure we stay low on that list rather than being at the top of the list, the most congested cities that need, you know, traffic helicopters? And before you know it, we won't be a 20-minute town. We'll be a 40-minute town or a 60-minute town. So how do we stay low on that? And that's planning a good comprehensive system.
Jordan?
So my name is Jordan Davis, and I'm the chair of the Create Columbus Commission, and Elissa is one of our commissioners. And the Create Columbus Commission is a thought leadership group on how the city should better attract and retain young professionals. And all of you were a part of our first ever YP Government Day. And I'm going to pick up on two things you just said. Is we believe that the demand is changing, that it doesn't matter how quick it is to get around a car, we don't want a car. And we believe that young professionals are making decisions today on if they want to stay here or move here, if they can have an easier, a more convenient way to get around. And so we believe there's a really fierce sense of urgency that needs to be happening in this community to make it easier to use the options that we want to use, which is not a car.
Question?
And so my question to you, Curtis, is what, and all of you, frankly, is what can we do tomorrow, today, in the next year or 3 years to make it easier and more convenient to use what we have?
Technology is one of those things. You say what we can do, your group or us as a community. What we're doing at COTA is we're looking at how technology improves how well our service is received, and those folks who don't want a car, whether they see public transit as a viable option. Certainly, fare payment systems have to be improved. Certainly, the ability to know where your bus is. You know where your Uber car is, and I'm not going to put my foot in my mouth and tell you when we're going to have that technology on the street. I'll just say, as Martin Luther King said in one of his speeches, not long. And so those are the kinds of things. The other thing I'll just say ditto to is what we all should be doing here is developing those champions who, as we pursue transportation improvements, they support us throughout the process. 2006 or 7, light rail might have happened if there were more well-placed champions. There's a lot of controversy in Cincinnati about the merits of their streetcar system, but they have it because there were some well-placed champions who fought through the process and made sure that that project continued. So that's what we need to be doing today so that we can build what we need as we move forward.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I'd like to build on that. I
Yeah.
think that what Curtis just said, and Elissa, what you said at the beginning, a community that has a vision will find a way to get it done. And so what Curtis said in building people to advocate for that at all levels, not just government, not just the advocates, not just young professionals, but our business community and our social services community, these are two big aspects of it. If we have advocates and that vision can come together in the next few years, we could do a lot.
Yeah, you're 100% correct that people don't want to own cars anymore, and the young people don't want to drive, don't want to take time to drive. And the key is then that they have almost a valet service at their hand, and how we plan that is going to be critical. They want to say, I want to get from A to B, and I want to get there at this time. It could be as simple as, you know, having a way that a message comes to their cell phone that says, you need to be on bus such and such because I checked your calendar and you need to be over at that place by that time. And by the way, you need to be at the bus station by this time to catch that bus. And then if they're loitering about, then, you know, 2 minutes before, something will say, hey, you got to go over to that bus station now. You know, really seamless, integrates into their life, is like a valet service. And, you know, we can think about that. Yeah.
You can pay for it?
No doubt, no doubt. Yeah.
That was a nod from Curtis. All right, next question.
I'm Marion Harris with the Greater Southeast Area Commission.
Hi.
I'm going to bring us to the here and now, and the question is for Curtis. We've been trying to get a bus stop in front of Independence High School. The closest bus stop is a mile away. Should we get it? How do you publicize it? And well, first of all, how do we get it? But if we should get it, how do you let the whole area, it's a whole suburban subdivision, there's all kinds of subdivisions out there that I'm sure if they knew there was a bus stop right there, would use it.
Gosh, you're asking me a specific question about a specific line.
You don't have to answer about the Independence High School, but should you, when you do put in a new bus stop, how do you let the area around it, how do you let people know that it's there?
Okay, that's an easier question. You know, that's a thing that we work through and struggle with every time we add new service, make a change to service. We've got to let people know what's out there in order for them to be able to use it. And we've got to do line-by-line marketing on our service. We've got to target audiences in the neighborhood that you're talking about, wherever the bus stop is, whether it's in front of Independence High School or someplace else. If we put the service out there, people aren't just going to come. They've got to know it's there, and we've got to make our best efforts to promote, advertise, market that service, target the market, and make sure that people who are in the impacted areas understand exactly how to use it. The biggest issue we have, I think, with public transit is not that it's not easy to use, but we don't do a good enough job informing people how easy it is to use. So you have pointed out one of the things that we work with and struggle with on a daily basis.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth, and not a fan of microphones. I do have a question, but I just wanted to let Curtis know that the Cincinnati Metro system is very close to launching their app, and they're working with the young professionals of Cincinnati. And I've already viewed the commercial that's going to go out and sort of get the youth engaged in taking the Metro system again.
Is that open data as well?
I'm not sure, but you check with them because they're pretty close. The commercial's already done, and it's pretty cool, and I think it'll get a lot of youth in Cincinnati working on it. But my question is, being from Cincinnati, I was against the streetcar, mainly because there is an insane difficulty to measure the return on investment for some of these things. And I wonder, and sometimes your return on investment is 10 years from completion. And I wonder if any of you have done studies on the return on investment on these, rail cars and all these other ideas. And if you have, how does that influence your decision?
Is there an example of return on investment for highways that's a good example? Just curious. Sorry, go ahead, Anson.
So just and I don't know if I'll give you all the details that you want, but part of our role at MORPC is for highways and other transportation improvements is to look at the return on investment, look at the costs to the environment and to the community and all of that. So that's something that we do. And the best example that we just did isn't on streetcars or highways, but on our greenways and bikeways system. And I can tell you that the study that we did on that shows clearly that it is a strong investment in quality of life and a strong return on investment. It does take some years to recoup it, but transportation improvements done wisely, they can have a big return on investment. So.
Yeah, I think if you look at not only just the dollars and cents, but look at the 3 R's. The 3 R's in return, including sociability or socialization costs, that a lot of times you can justify, over a longer period of time, the infrastructure that's required. But you need to include all of those 3 R's.
Measuring the economic development impacts is one way that it's been done. Even with relatively inexpensive projects like what was done in Cleveland with their Health Line, their fully robust BRT, bus rapid transit project. I haven't committed numbers to memory, but there are millions and millions of dollars of economic development that have occurred along Euclid Avenue from downtown out to the east simply by building a bus rapid transit system that's a catalyst for that development. And so these types of projects, major public transit projects, have been proven over and over again throughout the country to generate great benefits in economic development.
Thank you. Mr. Dodson?
Sure. I'm Andrew Dodson. My question is specifically for William, but I suppose for everybody, and it's for William because Insight 2050 is a MORPC-led initiative. And what I thought was really interesting is that it lays out various scenarios, right, from kind of the least dense to the most dense. So my question is going to be about land use and costs, not costs of the transit system, costs monetary and environmentally of the different types of of development that could occur over the next 50 years. Just to lay it out a little bit, New York City, before it built its transit system, there were still farms in Harlem, right? The system that they built led to the development of New York City as we know it. At the same time, on the other coast, well, later on the other coast, Los Angeles exploded. Only after 1920, they relied on highway for the vast majority of their expansion and growth, and we see the land use pattern that happened there. So if those are the two ends of the extreme, what are the costs associated with the various modes of transit in land use terms?
Great question. Yeah, so the thing about Central Ohio that we're good at is we know that this is a good place to live and that we're steadily growing. But what Insight 2050 is trying to help us with is just knowing that we're growing slowly and being comfortable with that, it'll catch up with you. And so as we look down 35 years, 500,000 potential people and how we plan for them could have huge costs. And Insight 2050 looked at these different scenarios that you talked about. The scenarios that focus on redevelopment in infill and focusing on community nodes in different suburbs and really looking at ways to maximize our infrastructure. If we do that as a region over 35 years, we save significant dollars in capital costs, significant dollars in ongoing operations and maintenance. I think just one difference between two scenarios, we save something like 220 square miles of farmland. And so when we think about this incremental growth, planning for it to make sure it doesn't get out in front of us and we end up with like LA or these other places is really what we're trying to get at. So you're right, redevelopment, looking at how best to really maximize those corridors, those transportation improvements, that's going to have big returns over 30 years.
Thank you. We have time for one last question.
Okay, I'll make it quick. I'm Mark Allen. I spent $3 billion at lunch today on light rail.
So did I.
And I'm thinking, and this may be something we don't, we've all been, I think there's so much support for light rail, and we've said, for years, gosh, we need something. We're the 15th largest city, we don't have the light rail. Now I'm thinking, has the time passed? Are we going to have the self-driving buses? Are we going to have the fleet of self-driving buses in a row that get us up and down High Street and from the airport and back? Which, you put in a fixed rail, it's not flexible. You have wheels on the ground. You have flexibility to go where the demand is. So have we passed, is there a need for light rail anymore? Did I just waste $3 billion?
Well, I think they're different, right? I think it's about choice and, cutting a piece out because of new technology. I think for me it's scary, particularly when you're talking about all people, right? I think that this is going to phase in at the top end of the income. Would you say that, Carla? Do you want to answer that?
At first, probably yes. However, if we think about it, it's probably going to phase in with those heavy-duty trucks first.
Yeah.
And then move into probably the senior communities, that kind of, for the people who need the mobility, and then become more of a luxury item. The nut to crack is going to be to get the sensors and the technology at an affordable price as quickly as possible, because you want all smart cars conceivably on the road.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think that the time has passed. I think the type of technology around light rail might change. I think it gets down to simply, if you're trying to move a bunch of people or a bunch of goods along a corridor, the more congested that is, the more you have to look at other modes other than individual cars. And so light rail can accomplish that. It can move a whole lot more people quickly. A COTA bus can accomplish that. It can move a whole lot more people in the same space. When we're dealing with cost restrictions right away, when we're trying to figure out how to serve people the best way, I think for a long time it's going to be a viable option. I think it's fair to say that.
Yeah, it's a huge matter of developing technology. As technology develops, how do we use technology in all of those modes? Right now, a big controversy in the United States with rail systems is what they call positive train control, basically designed to prevent accidents with trains. And how much will that technology develop to make movements of trains more efficient and be able to use the infrastructure that is in place, all of the rail lines that are in place to move freight and passengers more efficiently. technology can help us get there.
Yeah, it depends on the urban planning as well. One interesting case is out at the University of California, San Diego, where they recently put in light rail from downtown San Diego all the way out to the campus. And I asked, how did you manage to do that? Because that was a huge investment. But fundamentally, they had several large companies also in that area that needed a way to get their employees from A to B and do it safely and allow them to be productive. So again, it was that collaboration with the industry, with the government, to allow this kind of a system be put in place, but specifically to get people where they needed to be employed and back home safely.
Thank you. All right, we're going to turn it over to Mo.
We know you enjoyed today's forum. Wow, so many questions, so many opportunities for our city. Thank you all for being here. I want to announce the results of our survey. We asked you 2 questions on your way in, and we had our staff to tally those. The first was, how did you get to CMC today? Our top 3 answers were 53 of you drove your car, 33 of you walked, and 26 of you carpooled here. So that's interesting information for us to take home today. And then we asked you, if you drove, where did you park? And about 49 of you said on the street meter parking, followed by 15 of you in the parking garage, and 12 of you in surface lots. So there's some quick information. You left lunch smarter today, all right? Remember, you can watch all of our forums on the ColumbusMetroClub.org website, also through PBS affiliates throughout the state and on Columbus Television. Let's thank our sponsors for today, Raymond Consulting, the Robert Weiler Company, and MS Consultants. Thank you for your support, along with our partners at the Society of Marketing Professional Services, and certainly to this panel, William Murdock, Carla Bailo, Curtis Stitt, and Elissa Schneider. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you next week.